Hello. What you're watching here today is this video clip I've been promising for some time that is an integration of concepts where I want to show you what it looks like when I go and apply all of these concepts interacting with a horse. So this is Aero. He's about 30 years old and he's kind of stiff. So I approached this with the idea of getting him moving. And as you can see, he shows absolutely no interest in moving, which is fine. There's no wrong answers here. So I let him know that. And it's just an exploration, right? So I'm going to go back out and try again. And as I come in this time, he still doesn't show any inclination to move. So I went ahead and I stepped on in front of him and asked him to move. And he walked off really lightly. I mean, it took like fingertip pressure before he walked off. Had I met resistance, I'd have let it go. And as you can see, when he walks off, he's quite stiff in his hind end. So I threw the rope just to say, yeah, I really would like you to walk. I'd like to be able to see how you're moving today. And so I keep my energy and intention forward so that he knows that that's what I want. He's not questioning it. And as he comes around here, I go ahead and stop and let him stop because I've seen enough to know that he's really stiff and I don't need to make him continue on. I had hoped when I turned in that he would follow me and come a little closer to the camera, and he didn't, so that's fine. Again, there's no wrong answers here. So this next section went on for almost 15 minutes. So I pulled some clips so you can see the progression from where we started to where we ended this phase. And you can see me rolling my neck and stretching because I'm actually resonating with Aero at this point. So this was a good opportunity to apply resonance. And he's responding to that by shaking his head, licking his lips, and he's resonating with me in turn. So you can see him, he looks at me here like, hey, we're doing something together. So when this happens, I'm observing him and observing things together with him, like the raven that he looked at. And so I looked with him. And we're going to fade out here into another clip. But what I'm doing here is observing him in a non-critical kind of way, just observing with my senses open and allowing whatever information he chooses to transmit my direction to land in whatever way it's going to land with me. For me, it's landing as physical sensations. So I'm feeling tension in my neck, tension in my shoulders, tightness in my back. And as I feel that, I stay focused on what I'm feeling and move it through myself. So I'm looking to relax my own body, relax the tension that I feel, let it move on through so that he can resonate with me in turn. As you can see him doing here, he's relaxing more and more, lowering his head, shifting his weight, softening, and there I rolled my neck and head in response to release the last bit of tightness that I felt. So again, this went on for 10 to 15 minutes, and then at some point in here, I decided that I was starting to feel compelled to put my hands on him and support him that way. So you'll see me here in a minute. I walk towards him, and it took me some time to do that as well. Because I keep resonating and I keep watching his response to me, and he kept kind of giving me indications that he didn't want me to come in too fast. So here in a second, I'm going to switch to another clip and talk to you about what happens next. Hey guys, I'm crouching over so I can make sure you see my face. I am here with Justine this morning, and I just spent some time working with one of the horses, and or a couple horses, and one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate for you guys is how I work with this movement piece of gently rocking the horses to facilitate a lot of things, which I'll talk about more in the class. But for now, I wanted to demonstrate this with Justine because I want to make sure you guys understand that I'm not pushing I'm setting up a little bit of motion in my own body, and my horses are following me. And I think it might be easier to see that with Justine and I demonstrating. So here we go. Oof. Okay. Put my hair up because my hair likes to sway. Which way will I go first? That'll work. So get our long hair out of our way. We already stepped this way a little bit more, so hopefully they can see our feet. So when I make contact, say I'm going to make contact with shoulder blade because that's the easiest part for me to make contact with on Justine. I want to make sure that my posture is good, that I've settled into the back side of my body. And there's a little technique in craniosacral therapy that I learned that I find the horses really like, where I, from the right here, the base of my occipital bones, I imagine that I have a tether going from here, about 45-degree angle out behind me, kind of like you'd stake down a tent with a wire. So it's taking my energy and anchoring it into the earth back here, so that I'm not going like I'm going to put my hand on her shoulder and I get really intensely focused with my eyes on what I'm doing, because that for a lot of horses feels like pressure, for a lot of people too. So what I want to do is anchor myself back here. I'm going to step in and float my hand onto the shoulder blade and let it settle there. And notice how she responds to it, which is nice. And you can see I'm not hardly doing anything, and she's already shifting her weight. So if I keep shifting my weight forward and back, she's just shifting with me. I'm not trying to make this happen. So if I come back and she doesn't, then I just come back and connect again. Or I can keep my hand out here so I stay connected, but keep the rock going. But it's tiny. So if I were to push her, she's going to walk off. Or if I came in hard and fast, she instantly braced against me. It's a reflexive action. She can't plan that. So if I come in and say I'm going to push you, she automatically braces. So that's not what you want to do. You want to float in softly and feel for an opportunity to move. She initiated the movement and I followed it. And if I intend for that to be a rocking motion, we're going to be rocking together. So that's what it looks like. And I'll write more about the mechanics of all of that in the class, so I can make sure you can hear me.
Okay, so let me continue on here and with Aero again. And I just have to say it totally cracks me up at the end of that clip with Justine, because she swears that my hand was still on her after it was gone and that she still felt me rocking her. So if that doesn't tell you how subtle it is, I don't know what does. So now we're going to go ahead, and you'll notice here that as in the video with Justine, I've floated my hand onto Aero's hip. I can't really explain to you why I chose his hip versus his neck. That's where I felt drawn to be. And so I'm just making contact, settling, and then feeling for a little internal rocking within myself that then he's picking up now and starting to follow it. So there you can see him moving and shifting. So I'm going to let him get comfortable, and maybe since he's resting the other leg, I'll go rock that hip a little bit. And I don't have a specific idea in mind about like what direction I'm going to send that movement. I try to just get a little internal motion happening within myself. So you can see not much is happening with me, but he's having fairly big responses. And I'm changing sides as he rests his hind leg, because it's pretty hard to ask him to move on a leg that's weight bearing. So now I've shifted away from his hips, and I've got my hands up on his lower back, the lumbar spine area. And you can see how much he's picking up the movement. It's tiny movement on my part,
but he's starting to make some pretty big shifts with me. And I try to watch, like I'll look at his legs and I see them weighting and unweighting. You can see his whole hind end kind of starting to wave. And I'll look up at his head and neck, and you can't see it because I'm blocking the view, but his whole neck was starting to wave and move. So I'll continue on in this vein, and I'm really just trying to follow whatever movement he gives me. So my forearm is dropping down a little bit onto his hip, and just whatever feels right there. He gave a big release into that hip, so I followed that motion with him, and I'm just doing this little internal rocking. I like to stand with one foot in front of the other because it makes it easier for me to have stability. And here again, this wasn't planned. I don't know why I took hold of his tail at this point. It just seemed like there was so much movement happening in the low back that might facilitate something interesting. So I tried it, and boy, did it. He was really flexing a lot through the lower back. So this becomes my form of body work, really, to facilitate movement in all these different places in his body, because I find that a lot more release happens through movement than it does just in a stationary situation. And you can see my handprint on his lower back up there. That's fine. I wasn't pressing per se. But he was pressing into me quite a lot. So sometimes you will see a handprint left behind because your horse is responding to what you're doing by leaning into you and asking for more. So if they do that, I will provide a little extra support. Now, notice that I'm not moving very much at all, and he's swaying quite a bit. Although that's a little hard to see with the camera in motion. Justine was trying to get a good angle where you could see that I wasn't really moving the electric fence tape much at all, but he's moving back and forth relative to the tape a fair bit. So there's a lot of benefits to this kind of movement in your horse. It's great for these guys who are older and aren't sound enough to really work anymore. I can free him up quite a lot by doing this, and I'll probably post another video in a day or two to show you what he looks like tomorrow. I'm hoping to have time to work with him tomorrow again, so you can see a little progression. So with Aero, I know he has issues in his hindquarters, and I kind of want to show you guys how I interact with all the different parts of his body. So this is one of my favorite things to do is stand with my hands on the points of the hips, and I stand in really close, and I tried to stand off to one side a little bit so that, for safety's sake, because if you don't know a horse, you really should stand off to one side. But if you know a horse really well, like I do Aero, and I feel pretty comfortable and confident about how I'm working and how they are going to respond, you'll do what I'm doing now, which is I have my chest and my belly up against his hindquarters and my hands higher up on his hips. And literally all I'm doing is breathing deeply. So I'm exhale, inhale. So as my belly expands, when I inhale, his body shifts forward, his pelvis shifts up and forward. As I exhale, he shifts back. So I can get a little bit of spinal flexion and spinal extension starting to happen, shifting weight forward and backwards, moving his thorax between his shoulder blades a little bit, just from my breathing. So that's really all that's happening there is I'm breathing and he's following it. There's no real hard, fast rule about how long I stay in a place. Just whatever feels good to me and seems like it's working for the horse. I like working with the rib cage quite a bit. In a horse that has more mobility in their rib cage, my hands will actually start to move a little bit like I'm playing the accordion. So when I inhale, my hands come together, and when I exhale, my hands come apart. And they'll get a whole lot of motion going that way through their rib cage, flexing and extending laterally. Aero doesn't have a lot of motion that way, so I decided to try a little bit different approach with him, which you'll see here in a minute. But it's fun to play with. You just put your hands in different places and get this tiny, so there's just tiny rocking motion happening in me, and see how he responds to it. Now I've shifted my position of my hands so that one hand is up between the withers of the shoulder blade and the other hand's on his rib cage, to see if maybe he can shift his whole body forward between his shoulder blades. And you can see his pectoral muscles firing here as he shifts a little bit. But even that, there's not a big shift. So I left that alone because I'm not getting a whole lot from that. So this time I have my whole arm, like my hand is tucked in behind his elbow, my forearm's resting against the girth area, my upper arm is rested against his rib cage, and it doesn't look like I'm doing anything, but I am breathing. And just the act of breathing, big inhale, big exhale, he's picking that up, and he's starting to release and relax, and I've kind of put my hip up to support my arm because he decided to lay a good portion of his weight into me. And what he's doing there is when you facilitate something like this, I'm allowing him an opportunity to suspend all of the tension in his rib cage and his back. And he got so relaxed, he started to fall asleep and almost fell down. So I actually here am trying to wake him up a little bit because he's so close to the fence, and I don't want him to fall into the fence. So tapping their nose like I just did is a good way to kind of snap them back a little bit so that they don't fall over and hurt themselves or hurt you. So I'm repeating the same thing on the other side, but I don't want him to fall asleep quite so deeply, again, because we're so close to the fence. So I'm going to let him move away from the fence here, and he's doing a lot of weird walking with his hind legs right now. I really thought he was going to lay down and roll or lay down and go to sleep. That triggered such a deep release. So I'm just going to step back and let him do what he's going to do for a minute. So again, there's a lot of benefits to this kind of subtle movement. One thing that's happening is that I'm getting the little muscles, the skeletal muscles, muscles closest to the bone. Those are the muscles for proprioception and balance control. And when I do these little rocking movements, I'm getting those little proprioceptive muscles to fire. And so that's a really useful thing for any horse. It's really, really useful if you have a horse on layup for some reason. So I'm going back now to try that rib cage on the right side. So I'm just, again, making contact, and I'm breathing. And just my breathing is creating a little movement side to side that he's starting to pick up and relax into. There he goes. So all of these little facial expressions, the twitching, you can see his breathing by how his nostrils are flaring. Those are all big indicators that he's doing a lot of letting go. And here again, I've swung my hip a little bit to support my lower arm because he has gotten quite heavy as he suspends more and more tension in his rib cage and his spine. And I'm letting that go largely because I don't want him to fall asleep and fall over. So I'm switching to, this is one of my favorite, another way to help them suspend tension. So he's got a lot of tension in his upper neck. If I can hold behind his chin, the lower jaw, and just hang out there, he'll start to relax more and more into my hand. And as he relaxes, I can start to possibly follow him as he opens up his throat latch a little bit more, or I can move a little bit to create a nodding motion or a shaking the head no kind of a motion to get some movement into his neck laterally. So here I'm shaking a little bit just to kind of get things moving a little bit. These little micro movements in the joints that are created when we do things like this stimulate the production of synovial fluid. So they're very useful things to do. Now, it's very important to note that I am not pulling his head towards me with my arm. I am shifting weight. You can't see that very well in the video, but I'm shifting my weight, not pulling. And I asked Justine to zoom in a little bit on his pectoral muscles because that little rocking that I'm doing, you can really see how much that's causing his pectoral muscles to fire and release, fire and release. So again, we're getting some nice proprioceptive muscle firing happening. So he's pretty relaxed now. I'm going to go into an area that can be a bit problematic for some horses, and that's going into the shoulder blades. And again, I just float onto his shoulder blade, and right now my hand position, I'm asking or intending for the shoulder blade to glide up and down. So I'm shifting again to where I have a little more one foot in front of the other so that I can push off of my left foot to follow the movement that he offers up. So for those of you who maybe don't know, horses do not have collarbones. So my hand is on the uppermost part of his shoulder blade right now. And I'm having Justine zoom in because I want you guys to see that I am not pushing per se. Now I'm pushing. So see how my fingers start to, now I'm going to go push, I think. So when I was pushing earlier, my fingers were digging into the muscle. Now at the end there, I wasn't pushing. The skin was just stretching a little bit in response to the impulse I was giving. What I'm trying to do is, and you can see it a little bit better here, is generate a little bit of movement in myself, and then whatever movement he offers up in response, I will follow it. So if I hit a brick wall, I don't push through it. I back off and I repeat. Here you can see my right hand is on the top edge of the scapula where the cartilage is, and my lower hand, the heel of my hand, is behind his shoulder joint. So I'm kind of encompassing the entire length of the scapula when I do this. And I'm having Justine zoom in a little bit on his feet because I want you to see how this is shifting his weight. So he's unweighting and weighting his foot over and over again, weighting and unweighting his foot. And the more motion he offers up, the more he'll unweight that leg until at some point they will pick up the whole leg. And I even had one horse who would pick up his whole leg and step forward in response to this. So then another way that I can, with that whole shoulder blade, I was going to say, one of the cool things about working it that way is I can intend for it to go forward and slightly in towards the midline. So if you have a horse that has no reflex response at the base of the neck in the palpation points that we've talked about, this is a good way to address the base of the neck, C6, C7 area, and get that to free up. And then this one is just, I've got my, the flat of my fingers laying on the shoulder joint, and I'm rocking back and forth. And it's just, again, stimulating some motion in the shoulder joint and getting his whole body rocking. And that stimulates synovial fluid production in the joints. And anytime they need to stop and scratch or process or do something, I always let them, because every so often I'll have a horse that will do some crazy itching thing and end up cracking their own neck back into place, or, they essentially do their own chiropractic adjustment. So now we're going to do the shoulder blade on the right side. As soon as he starts to, when I'm waiting and I'm feeling for some receptivity, and then when I start to feel receptivity from him, I start to rock. Again, note that one foot's a little behind the other. I have to be very tactful with Aero. He will bite me if he doesn't like what I'm doing. So here again, you can see the shoulder blade rolling forward and in just a little bit. And again, that's a really good one for freeing up anything that's going on around C6, C7. When Aero first came into my world, he got attacked by another horse and ended up with a slab fracture behind his right patella. And this is the kind of work that I did with him. He stood in one spot for 6 weeks, and I did standing wraps to keep his legs from swelling, and they'd come off every day, and I would massage his legs and be circulation for him. And we did a lot of these kind of rocking things, and 6 weeks later he walked out of the stall in pretty darn good shape. And while we're watching this bit, I have to tell you all, I was trying to record this a little bit earlier and heard the strangest noise. Very loud scraping, scratching noise, and then a very loud bang, and discovered that a very large tree branch fell right outside my office window here. So that recording went away. Okay, so now I'm going to start working on his neck. And again, I like to do things that generate some movement. So I'm not just massaging in a way that works the muscle. I'm continuing this idea of rocking. So the heel of my hand is on the vertebra of his neck, and I'm just moving a little bit, moving a little bit, moving a little bit down the neck. With that rocking motion, my right hand is on his shoulder and it can support. So there were quite a few times when I was doing this where I felt inclined to have my right hand moving in the opposite direction of my left, and it seemed to facilitate a really deep stretch. And he started here, like he was relaxing, turning into me, and just having me go really deep into that C6, C7 area. So if you see pushing, it's because he initiated that. He was pushing really, really hard on me. So I want to be able to support that. And this is where one foot behind the other comes in really handy again. So here again, he got so deep into it that he almost fell asleep. And went down. So sometimes horses will lay down during body work sessions. Sometimes they just go really deeply asleep. I prefer that they don't fall down, so I will intervene if I really think that he's going to fall down. Thankfully, he did not. He did this really sweet nicker right in here, though. Okay, so now I'm going to do right side of his neck the same way. So I'm rocking to try to create a little bit of side-to-side movement. Originally, I thought he might move his head away from me and we'd get a nice stretch, but he actually came into me and arched his neck towards me, which is actually a healthy reflex response to putting pressure around C6, C7. So I'm sure not going to argue with his idea. And here again, he's pushing into me quite hard. And there he nickered again and almost went down. So, their responses to release and things shifting in their body are widely varied. I've never had this particular response from Aero before, but I've also never approached the work with him quite like I did today. Today was a new day for me in terms of where I went with my work, and I'm real pleased with the response that I got from Aero. Sorry for the traffic noise. I have to sit at my computer desk to be close to my editing software to watch this as I go, and it's not like it's a recording studio, so a little low tech. All right, so I switched to another little clip here after he finished processing. I really wanted to work with the base of his neck and try to get a little more movement happening in there based on the depth of response that he had to it. So what I like to do always, especially when they get that deeply relaxed after body work, is find a way to take this all into motion. And the reason being that this is a 30-year-old horse who's not super fit, and he needs to have a certain amount of tone in his body to safely navigate his environment. So a horse that's too deeply relaxed is actually at risk of injury. So I don't want to leave him in this super toasted state without kind of waking up his reflexes to stand, walk, and turn again. So what I'm doing here is actually putting my fist into or the back of my fingers into that base of his neck there, C6, C7 area. And I have the halter on because I'm bringing his nose towards me a little bit, and I'm asking him to keep his head. I don't want him to put his head down right now, and you can see he's objecting a little bit to that. And I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm not going to worry about him backing up. I want him to do that. I want him to go forward in a circle around me with a little bit of pressure on the base of the neck, because that can really open some things up in there. I'll try to show you this another time, but sometimes you can take that into like a shoulder in or shoulder four kind of a deal, which is pretty cool, and bring a lot of opening into that neck. So now I just want to walk him a little bit and change directions and just notice how he's moving, how he's behaving, if there's anything there that's concerning to me that I don't want to leave him with, because I feel like he's about done. So here I'm asking him to shift his center of gravity back, because that wakes up his reflex to stand. And I want that awake before I turn him loose. But I do notice just in watching him move when I was with him that his movement is quite a bit less stilted and stiff than it was at the beginning of the session. He feels more fluid, more coordinated, more at ease in his body, particularly like there in the hind end. That was a pretty dang coordinated turn compared to what we started out with. So that's really what I'm after. There you have it.